All right, we're going to give it a minute to let some of our viewers come on into the room. We're still a minute outside of 6 anyway. For those of us that have not eaten, I'm going to get a little protein in.
And I did fail to mention, I am going to be streaming live on our Facebook. So
is that okay with you all?
Yeah, that'll work.
So it'll also have another place to live.
You know, I like that. That's good, Jewel. Welcome, welcome to those that are coming into the virtual room. Come on in. We're just going to give it some more time to let a few more people join us. Happy Tuesday. I'm just back in on a red eye today, so I'm not quite sure what day it is. But I had my green tea and some mixed nuts to give me some protein and getting energetic and excited.
There you go.
Okay, I see people are trickling in. Welcome, welcome. Come on in. We're excited to have you all here. For those of you that are just entering, welcome to the Silence to Shame Community Conversation. We're going to give it a few more minutes to allow some others to join. Okay, I'll give it 2 more minutes and then we'll get started. Notice I'm wearing my Silence to Shame / Hawk shirts. Go Hawks. Is it tomorrow night or tonight? I can't remember if the game is tonight or tomorrow, but I'm ready. Okay, excuse me. Excuse me. All right, we're gonna go ahead and get started. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Good evening. Happy Tuesday. My name is Shanti Das. I am the founder of Silence to Shame Incorporated. And on behalf of myself and our executive director, Jewel Gooding, welcome to our community conversation, navigating the intersection of trauma and anxiety in the LGBTQ plus community. And as an ally, I would just like to say that this is a really important conversation for our organization and for me personally, as we get ready to close out Pride Month. We want to make sure, and I want to make sure, that these are very thoughtful conversations that we have and that we are really doing our part to educate the community so that we can be better allies and supporters, both within the community, within our families, within our schools, and just everywhere. That we're also very, very thoughtful and that we understand that words matter, that language matters, that representation matters. And I want to make sure that we are shining a light, as much as we talk about mental health in communities of color, that we are also making sure that Black and Brown, people in the LGBTQ plus community are represented, especially with the work that we do at Silence to Shame. So thank you again for joining. I want to thank my dear friend who used to be a colleague in the music industry, Melantha Hodge, who was able to, she's the strategic partner, she's a strategic partnership manager, sorry, at the Los Angeles LGBT Center. And I'm just so grateful, Melantha, for your partnership and allowing the organization to work with us for the event today. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our incredible panelists today and experts that we have to participate in the conversation. First, we have Dr. Sharla Kargi, who is a clinical psychologist. And I'm gonna let you all kind of share a little bit about your background, but I'll go through and introduce you all. And then if you can, in 1 minute or less, tell us a little bit about your background and why this conversation is important to you. Next up, a dear friend, an ATLian that I've done a lot of work with in the past. And I'm just so grateful that Cameron Triplett, who is our communications manager, was able to confirm them for the event. So let's welcome Jeffrey Martin. He is a music journalist, creative director, and founder of Queer Black Boy. Welcome, Jeffrey. And last but not least, we have Lucky Alexander Fuller, who is the Information and Engagement Coordinator at the Los Angeles LGBT Center. And I feel like we're gonna be great friends because y'all, we were on here just talking before this, and I felt like we had already had such an amazing panel and we didn't even have to do this one in the pre-panel, but no, all jokes aside, it's gonna be a really great conversation, and I'm just so honored and humbled that you all are giving of your time today to share. So we will start first. Let's start with you, Jeffrey. Give us a little bit about your background and why this topic and conversation is near and dear to you today.
Yeah, absolutely, Shanti. And thanks for, getting this panel started. Again, my name is Jeffrey Martin. They, them, he, him pronouns. I'm an artist and entrepreneur, and I run Queer Black Boy Studios, which is, again, an artist studio and creative agency to really help brands and individuals scale their work. Had an opportunity to work with some really great organizations here in Atlanta, like the Trans Housing Coalition, Southern Fried Queer Pride. So yeah, I think that just being a person who is queer, gender fluid, and it's very much about advocacy, this panel was just really, really smart to come to.
Thank you, Jeffrey Martin, and I apologize for mispronouncing your last name before that. So thanks again for being on the panel. Next up, we have Lucky Alexander Fuller. Welcome, Lucky.
Hello, hello. Thank you for having me. Thank you for assembling this panel. I think this particular conversation is super important for me specifically because, I, for all intents and purposes for this moment, I represent the transmasculine community. I also run an organization called Invisible Men, which, we do a lot of work around mental health. We do a lot of work around healing as well. Here with the seniors that I work with, we do a lot of that work as well. So definitely appreciate being here.
Thank you. Thank you. We're so excited that you're here. And last but not least, let's welcome Dr. Sharla Kargi to the panel. And I feel like we've known each other forever from our East and Western Indian background. So I love the work that you do. And I'd love for you to just give a little bit about your background and why you're here today.
Good evening, everyone, and namaste. And I thank you, Shanti, for assembling this amazing group. This is an important area in my practice. And I'm based out in New York, a clinical psychologist in New York. I also teach at the City University in St. John's, psychology courses. And this area is of great interest to me because I found that my students mostly have schooled me and gravitated towards finding that trust to talk, to come out and to let me know that, hey, I need help. What can you do to help? And without really realizing that I was that person, I became that person. And I'm truly honored. Glad to be here.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you for your work. A little bit of housekeeping. You all are tuned in via our Zoom platform, but I want to welcome our Facebook listeners. The panel is being streamed live on Facebook right now on the Silence to Shame page. So feel free to share this and start a watch party with other family members and friends. And let's continue to educate all of our communities around this important conversation. So we are going to dive right in. Lucky, again, thank you so much for joining the panel and the work that you do. In addition to working for the Los Angeles LGBT Center, I looked at your website for your organization, Invisible Men, and I want to read a part of your mission. This platform has been created for trans men of all walks of life to share their own narratives in their own words. Trans men and non-binary trans masculine folks of color are unapologetically centered. This space is designed as a platform to explore trans masculine visibility and how we are seen or not within the community and the world. To mainstream society, we are almost non-existent. Lucky, can you share with us how the trans experience can often be more complex and traumatic in present day society?
Well, I can speak from a transmasculine perspective. And because transmasculine folks don't have the same kind of visibility that maybe our femme counterparts do, due to all of the murders and all of the horrendous things that are happening to our sisters and our siblings. But transmasculine folks endure mental health, stress, all of those different pieces in a different kind of way because of the way that we're socialized, because of the way that we move and navigate through the world. Once we are assumed cis, meaning that we are aligned with the gender that was handed to us at birth, we're also aligned with all of these problematic assumptions around what masculinity looks like and how it's supposed to be performed. And so it was very important for us to allow folks to, for folks to own their own narratives and show up in the world the way that they choose to, as opposed to the way that they're ascribed to. As transmasculine folks, you know, whether you're non-binary or you lie within the masculine binary, we are handed this narrative that we're supposed to be strong and stoic, and we're supposed to be independent, and we're not supposed to show emotion and all of those things. And because of that, a lot of our folks that you know kind of sit within the transmasculine arena, within that demographic, are left to kind of fend for themselves when it comes to mental health, medical, a lot of the other different things. And so this platform that we created was very important to really bring that visibility, to show up. I'm a really big proponent of, you can't ask for help if folks don't know that there's a problem, or you can't be mad at folks for not offering help if they don't know there's a problem. So let's bring some visibility to a demographic that is often an afterthought or just erased and left out altogether.
Thank you, Lucky. Dr. K, do you have any thoughts on the trans experience in society from a clinical perspective?
Yeah, Shanti, thank you. It's such an important question to really start a dialogue with. So in terms of the experience, just transitioning that process, it's inherently just a traumatic experience for a person going through this process. A few things that will come up, from a clinical perspective, we're looking at the emotional pain that could possibly lead to anxiety and depression. And I say possible because I also don't want to diagnose anyone and to formally say that that's what's going to happen, because it's subjective. Everybody experiences it in their own way. But we're looking at anxiety, we're looking at depression, we're looking at gender dysphoria. And those are three big components in terms of the mental health aspects or clinical aspects of this experience. And with the gender dysphoria, there's a strong desire to hide physical signs of the biological sex. And when a person knows who they are on the inside, to have to hide certain things, it brings about a different level of emotional pain. And that trauma is layered, it becomes a layer. That's one layer of it. The depression factor, not being able to sleep, not being able to eat properly or appropriate meals. Food doesn't digest the right way. You can't function at work. And when you look at the whole picture, everything is being affected. So your sense of self, you're looking at this sense of self where you're losing big parts of yourself. And there is an isolation factor that that stems from anxiety, not being able to really advocate for yourself and wanting to be accepted by society, wanting to be accepted by family members, by peers, by co-workers, and to be able to really speak your truth, who you are, because we are made and grown and bred in a society that judges first, and we forget the human component of that. And when we look at these factors, we look at the emotional pain, the pain from gender dysphoria, we look at the depression, we look at anxiety. This can all lead to so many different areas, including suicidal ideations, suicidal attempts, suicidal thought process, self-injurious behaviors, people wanting to hurt themselves because they're not being accepted or they don't even know how to cope. And the coping skills are what's needed for people to be able to accept themselves for who they are. And when they're not being accepted by their community or their peers or family members, or the biggest factor, the culture, it becomes very, very detrimental to their mental health, their overall sense of self, their overall self-efficacy, and their well-being. And so when we look at this, we look at the lack of appetite that comes from not eating, from not being able to eat. How does that affect us as a person? When you don't eat properly, you're not able to sleep properly, you're not able to function. So it's almost a domino effect when we look at how this actually takes charge of your whole body. This can lead also to drug use and the depression, the anxiety, the isolation, to different level, alcoholism, hard drugs. And I say hard drugs, and I mean, we're looking at crack cocaine, we're looking at meth, we're looking at so many different areas that could injure someone. And when you're talking about a person who's going through this transition, they're taking, testosterone, or they're going through hormone treatments rather. How does all these things affect the effectiveness of the hormone or the testosterone? Right? Not being able to eat, you have to be able to keep your body in a certain shape or a certain state for this to actually take effect and to work the way it should work. So in terms of how the mental health component of this, it affects overall self-confidence and the ability for people to advocate for themselves and owning their own oneness or their own power. And that gets taken away because of the influences of these factors. And that brings about not only the mental anguish, but physical pain. Indigestion causes physical pain. And it's already painful for someone to have to inject themselves every day. This is something that they have to go through. And they're feeling that pain coupled with mental anguish. It's just completely detrimental on a person's ability to function as a whole.
Thank you, Dr. K. I think it's just really important that, again, we continue to have these conversations and open up the dialogue, because we were talking earlier in our pre-session, there are just so many layers to it, right? And so much that we don't even think about. And when I say we, I identify as a heterosexual female, but even just in terms of planning and putting this conversation together, I thought, shame on you, Shanti, for not doing more research, right? Because it's just, I'm still learning, and I'll put that disclaimer out there. I think that it's great that we're having this conversation, but it's so much more that we need to do to educate ourselves individually, collectively as a society. And so I apologize if in advance I may say the wrong thing as I'm learning. Please feel free to correct me, but I am definitely committed, and we are committed at Silence to Shame to making sure that we support the Black trans community, the Black queer community, and everyone in terms of people of color in the LGBTQ plus community, so that we can open up the dialogue and have these conversations. I want to bring you in, Jeffrey, into the conversation. And can you talk to us about your journey and how you've seen trauma or anxiety play out within this community, and with your own personal experiences identifying as a Black queer person?
Yeah, absolutely. I sit here and I think about all the many lives I've had because of just family of origin things. But I very much grew there. There's a New York Times article that came out about 2013 that if you grow up in the bottom fifth rung economically in Atlanta, there's a 90-something% chance that you're gonna probably die there. I would say that me and all of my friends who are now alive and living were very much in that statistic bucket. Some of the things that kind of come up for me when I think about this topic as a Black non-binary person that's grown up in the South, that's grown up around all this music and culture is my time when I was a teacher and did Teach for America work. And just a lot of the things, I was really fortunate. I was the only Black Spanish speaking teacher for my only Black Spanish speaking population, and did a lot of transition plans for a few of our students who were transitioning, whether they were AMAB, so assigned male at birth, or AFAB, assigned female at birth, and they're going FTM, so female to male, or MTF, male to female. Those were things that, as the special education coordinator, community person, I had to think about that for my students. And even when I came back to teach at my high school here at Drew, where we had some cyberbullying that was going on about it. I think when I look at a lot of the data, and you can go on, the Black Lives Matters website to find this more specifically, but Black, gender nonconforming, and trans folks are the most institutional misunderstood demographic across every single institution, whether that be nonprofit, for-profit, hospitals, you name it. When you look at specifically Georgia, where our counterparts in the Northeast and the West Coast, they end up getting a certain amount of that state's GDP is given toward LGBT advocacy funding. Georgia, we get very little, and more specifically in the region of the South. And we're more attacked than a lot of our other counterparts, despite the fact of us having more LGBTQ identified folks in this region than the rest of the United States. So I think when I think about all the impacts of that, and like, oh, wow, that's not even thinking about, let's just take a step back and go all the way back to the 1930s when the Hays Code, that's Hayes code, was made. This is around when movies started to get color and Technicolor. And the distribution companies, when we're thinking about media, they were very constrained in what they wanted to show. A lot of women characters, a lot of the queer oriented characters were kind of pushed aside. Folks like the pirate from Peter Pan and the main villain from Aladdin comes up. I know I'm digressing a bit, but when I talk about those cartoons that have impacted generations of folks from the 30s onward, a lot of this stuff is rooted in every single fabric of, our day-to-day existence. So I've definitely seen it personally and how it's impacted me as a person who's lived through PTSD and have learned the skills that I have to supporting my students, and even on to entrepreneurship and creative world where I'm mentoring folks and writing about artists and interviewing artists. It's definitely something that is effervescent. And I do feel that COVID and the impacts of COVID and just the process of grieving and what it's brought up is really kind of forced a conversation that should have been had back in the 1930s. And I think that we're just kind of realizing, it's always been this tension, but it's just kind of realizing how much we were colonialized in the way our thought processes were about the institutions that we were in. It's probably a mouthful, but like colonialization is something that impacted the whole world from a long time ago. So when I think of the macro levels of the suicide levels, of the dysphoria, of some of the ridiculous trans murders that we're having of Black trans women by cis folks who don't understand them, or the complete misgendering of Black trans men such as Tony McDade, who didn't really get the justice that he deserved at all. It's a lot. It's still a big pause as we're coming up out of this thing of COVID.
Thank you, Jeffrey. And you touched on something about pop culture, right? And movies and commercials and representation. And even now, you mentioned to me earlier about there's dialogue going on right now on the internet about Lil Nas X's performance. And I know that that made some people uncomfortable. We are seeing more representation of like lesbian couples and gay couples on television and in films. I do feel like we have a long way to go for trans representation in pop culture. Lucky, let's bring you into the conversation about that and how like some of the hypocrisies, right, that still exists within culture. And we'll bring you in, Dr. K, into this as well. Like, how does that make you feel? How can we kind of combat that, right? And continue to really educate society at large so we can cut down on, individuals and people within the LGBTQ plus community and within the trans community, specific to your trans masculine community, to really deal with a lot of what's going on in those challenges. I know it has to be frustrating, and you're constantly trying to like prove yourself, and for what reason, right? We all belong to the human race, and
Right.
there's so much more that needs to be done in a thoughtful and meaningful way.
I think when it comes to the media, if there was better representation, because if you look at it like this, when you see trans women in media representation, they're always placed as the prostitute or the drug addicted individual, but they're always given this connotation instead of just giving them regular roles as regular people, right? And so I think that whether you're trans mass, trans femme, non-binary, whatever that looks like for you, then you should be treated just as anyone else would be treated. We're all people, we're all humans, and me as a person, I'm tired of fighting to prove that I'm human, as opposed to proving that I'm a man, as opposed to proving that I'm this, that, or the third, right? I think that there needs to be more space made for trans folks to really show up in these places. That way they have the same kind of access to money and monetary gain as anyone else does. I think that would definitely be a game changer, because instead of just surviving, because all of us within, and I can't say all, but most of us within the trans community are in survival mode. We've always been in survival mode, and we need to have a chance to thrive just like anyone else.
Absolutely. And I want to say, I don't know if you all are familiar with this ABC television show, The Big Sky, but I want to say there is a trans female character. And I was pleasantly surprised to see, that at least ABC was starting to open up the doors for the community. So that was really good, but definitely a long, long, long way to go. Dr. K, do you have anything to add to that?
Sure. I want to commend Lucky for bringing up the word survival mode. And Jeffrey touched on, both of you guys touched on this earlier, and even now touched on the colonialist mentality. So we have our cultural influences, and we have our parents. We're looking at the different generations, different perceptions, different thought processes. The colonialist mentality is, you do as I say. It's very rigid, it's very punitive. You will be what I want you to be, not need you to be. You will be what I want you to be. And that is survival mode, because the colonialist mentality, everyone is treated either as a slave or an indentured laborer. And I put that in quotations because indentured laborers they weren't indentured laborers, they were also slaves. And let's just name that for really what it is, because they were lied to, and by the colonialist, those countries. And I'm not going to go down that road. That's a whole different show. And when we look at the survival mode, people from the LGBT community, they're placed in a position where they present with a defensiveness, and it takes away the validity of who they are as a person. And because they're always being judged, and they're used to that. So the trauma in their head, like, to even be comfortable with themselves, have that self-confidence to say, this is who I am. These are my pronouns, and this is my name. This is what I would like to be called. It's presented with such defensiveness, and they always have to fight. And why are we fighting to remain a human being when that's the first thing we should see? And when we look at the different levels of trauma that culture brings to this community, where our parents, our communities are not culturally sensitive. And what gets lost within the culture is the combination of a misconception with the religious texts and what culture really is. And it's embedded into religion. God says you're not supposed to be this way, right? It's a lot of confusion, a lot of misinterpretation. And it just leads back to this area that I'm going to name bullying. You're bullying a person out of their right to be who they are. And the right to be a human being first. Why do I have to stand there and say, that and educate you or ask you to call me by this pronoun? Like, this is who I am. And I go back to the clinical aspects of this, where we're looking at a person as a whole, who you are on the inside, not being able to feel that from the community that you're in. It's so detrimental for that person's sense of self. And they're just their overall self-efficacy. So we look at, again, we're looking at loneliness on a whole different level. And that's a very, very traumatic experience. Loneliness, that isolation, not wanting to be out in the community, not wanting to go around certain family members. Certain ones are tolerant, certain family members are not. And certain family members are going to judge you. And that's the only thing that many cultures know. The judgment comes first, and the acceptance comes after you educate. So we're going to have to continue to educate. The COVID pandemic hit us like a ton of bricks. What it did was it hijacked our cognitive system. Cognition has changed in terms of how we process information. Isolation has to be redefined, especially for this community, because one of the biggest resources is even having a community center to go to and not being able to go there because we're stuck. You have to be in the house. So what this has done, it's hijacked your brain, your temperament has changed, and now you have changed as a person. So what's going to happen? And what I'm finding is defensiveness went up again. Survival mode is at its core right now, because I haven't been let out of the house. So I'm going to come out now. You're going to see me, and you're going to see me as I want you to see me. And I don't care if you see me. And so the tolerance level is going to drop as well. And we have to, remind ourselves, and for us, for my fellow panelists, our job becomes so much more challenging because the education that we're going to present, it's on a whole different level. Mm-hmm. It's being created on a whole different level, and we have to be able to be creative every time. We have to be able to be that good to be able to capture our audience with just being there.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's just a different, I wouldn't say different, just such an added level of pressure, right? And strain overall, and the constant re-education, right? Especially as we start to slowly open back up. So I thank you for that, Dr. K. I want to go back to Lucky. Your role with the Senior Services Department at the Los Angeles LGBT Center entails being a touchstone for your senior clients and providing them with assistance with applying for benefits that they may not be eligible for. What mental health resources are you able to provide for your clients? I'm sure the seniors came from a generation and the time where trauma was there on so many levels, and they were afraid to be themselves and even to ask for help, right?
Right.
I'm grateful that probably some of the seniors now are just seeing what the younger generation and community is doing, but just being, able to have that courage, right? And that self-confidence that Dr. K talked about, to ask for help.
Right. With our seniors, it's, the senior center, the LA LGBT Center has its own medical facility, but within the senior center, we provide emotional support the best that we can, as the senior team does. But it's one thing that we have to be very cognizant of is the era in which these folks came up and what that looked like in the way of discrimination and those different intersectionalities that come with that, right? And so we have a lot of our Black folks may not trust other folks that are not Black. So that leaves it a little difficult to kind of navigate some of those things if we have, other folks in those spaces that are like case managers and whatnot that may not be Black. So how do we bridge that, right? And then, you know, there's a lot of different intersectionalities that come with that, because as a transmasculine person and dealing with older transmasculine people, we also have to look at what does that time frame look like when they transition? Because if you transition like myself, I transitioned when I was 30, right? And so having 30 years of that access to emotions, that space to say, I'm not okay. And then all of a sudden, when you start to present more and more cis presenting or more aligned with heteronormative views, then they expect you to behave in a specific kind of way, right? So if you go 30 years with space to say, I'm not okay, or I'm having a bad day, and then that space disappears, where do they put that? Where do we send them to say, okay, you no longer have that space. You're now a man and you don't get to express emotion, or you don't get to say, I'm not okay, because men in our society are having to be stoic, or they're told that they have to be independent, or they're told all of these different things, but expressing emotion is not one of them, right? And so when it comes to those particular pieces, it's really hard to navigate, not as a service provider, but also as someone that is part of the work, right? Because even as a transmasculine person, knowing what those different suicide rates look like for our demographic, you know, 55% of trans men, okay, is the suicide rate for transmasculine folks, as opposed to 14% for your general population. And then you have our trans femme folks, who are looking at somewhere between 26-27%, and then our non-binary folks hover somewhere between 26 and 25% around. And those are just suicide rates. But like we were talking to Dr. K earlier, that's just those folks that have been reported, right? So we're not looking at.
That's right, because how many people have we not, pulled, right? We don't
exactly.
That just goes back to even, in Black and Indigenous communities of color, when you have this research that comes out, it's like, okay, so who did you even really talk to, right? It's just a small sample of the population. I didn't want to cut you off, but I can understand how many people have not been surveyed, within the community.
Right, especially when we're looking at the masculine demographic, but also it also brings a red flag when we look at the male demographic, the cis male demographic, right? In the heteronormative world, what are they dealing with? And their suicide rates and their mental health rates look a lot like trans men's.
Can you explain a little bit more to our viewers who may not understand the exact terminology? Walk us through what that looks like.
Okay, so transgender by definition means going from one to the next, regardless of what that looks like, right? Cis meaning you stay within the boundaries that you're given. So if you identify with the gender that you were born as, then you are deemed cisgender, right? And if anyone outside of that would technically be transgender.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for that. I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
I want to go to you next, Jeffrey, and then we'll bring you back into the conversation, Dr. K. As a music journalist, and I know you're such a fan of pop culture and music, what have you noticed in terms of representation and integration for Black, queer, and trans people? We touched a little bit on it, but I want you to kind of go a little bit deeper what we were talking about in the pre-session.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna try my best to kind of make a statement about the other two folks too, because they just said some really great things. I think, and it also is going to answer your question, Shanti. I think with one of the things that stood out to me, what Dr. K brought up was just that folks are really, really decolonializing everything if they're smart. And specifically colonialism did a erasure of queer and trans history from our religious and spiritual spaces. If you were to go through and really look at a lot of this history, a lot of the things that we talk about as it relates to gender expression and orientation weren't necessarily all the same things before some of these spaces, but again, a whole other different discussion. I think connecting that to your question, Shanti, this year, I noticed that all of the major hip hop and radio stations never said Happy Pride. Specifically some of the ones that I was listed here. I'm not gonna drop too many names. We all know. And then even on the BET Awards, I know we've kind of touched a little bit on Lil Nas X's performance. But before we go there, MJ Rodriguez, who was in Pose, which made its way into every household. My aunts and stuff, they were like, "Are you watching season 3?" And I was like, "Wait, you've been watching Pose?" So I was these moments and things who have made it into the households. MJ Rodriguez came and gave an award, I think, for Woman of the Year or something like that. But there was not a happy pride moment. And I was like, wait, like you have like the tea like right in front of there, and there was no happy pride. And then with Lil Nas X, everyone was concerned about him kissing a boy, and like Britney and Madonna and them did that a long time ago. But like, are we not talking about the baby who had himself skiboarding or snowboarding on like a thing of semen in a woman's mouth in a music video, and we didn't talk about that being vulgar? So I think all the things that I'm trying to wrap up, there's going to continue to require to be not just allyship, but I like to I talk with my folks in DEI spaces, diversity, equity, and inclusion spaces about like, how can you be an accomplice? Because allyship has this passive thing about it. And accomplice work, you know, even with me as a music journalist, like I happen to have a really great platform where I work for at 032C, and I'm starting to get more control on which artists that I'm able to cover and how long my features are, who I think about featuring. Yeah, we're about to start seeing a different world in this music space. I mean, yeah, I don't know. Things are very, very much changing in music spaces. And I mean, I'm speaking with Shanti Das about people, but you know, it's shifting, and I'm really proud of Lil Nas X and all the things that he's doing. I think that those discussions are causing a lot of Sunday discussions and a lot of Twitter discussions. And the thing about it is, and I know Dr. K can chime in on this, but you can't really work on trauma work until you name it. And if it's naming the ignorance so that we can move forward, then it's naming the ignorance so that we can move forward.
Thank you, Jeffrey Martin, for that. Really, really great insight there. So let's bring Dr. K into this, and let's talk about naming it and calling it so that we can process through it the right way and understand.
Yeah, Jeffrey, yes, thank you for I see many different podcasts and panels that we're going to be a part of because of these. We've now started our own dialogue, which I'm so very proud of. And we did that within an hour. Thank you, Shanti. So I wanted to go back as well. There is a question I was looking at where it was asked, what are some of the things that allies have said that were very helpful in validating? And I think a part of my contribution kind of talks about that a little bit. So one of the things that I wanted to highlight is when we look at people who are transitioning, and let's just take an example, an adolescent. They're already going through adolescent changes in life. Sense of self, identity, trust in themselves, autonomy, industriousness. They have that to deal with. That coupled with culture not accepting that, right? When you look at those dynamics and where it brings a person so low to the ground, like they're flat in their face. And when we're looking at people on that level, we need groups, we need family support. We're looking at peer support. We're looking at a group with people who are like us, people who are of that similar, that like-mindedness, that similarity to who they identify as, to be that ally, to be that group, to support people. We need groups in schools, in middle school. Out of all middle schoolers are aliens, right? They know everything. You cannot argue with them. They are experts in all areas. And to be able to pull the information out of, and let's just say middle school people, pull the information out of them to be able to get to where they are. We're looking at parenting style. We're looking at attachment. Like, who is going to want to talk about what they're going through on a quote unquote regular level, much less transitioning? right? So we're looking at two different aspects. And if we break that, we're, deconstructing this one person to reconstruct who they're on the inside, and to bring that person out. So it becomes, we have to look at the challenges that they face that are typical challenges, and that may be like a worse word to use, but I can't think of a better one right now, but looking at the changes that they're experiencing. So you have a female transitioning to male who's going through all the treatment process and getting, testosterone, but still getting a period, still having breasts, looking into the mirror and experiencing that dysphoria, like it's still there. It's not going away. I have to have a surgery for this to go away. Or there are people who will take duct tape and tape themselves down just to wear a tank top to not feel that. And when you look at the level of pain that's associated with that, that pain should lead us to the allies, to the resources that we can create for people. How do we help? We need moms in these groups, moms who can say, okay, so it's okay. You have your period and your stomach hurts, your belly's hurting. This is what we do for a typical person, for a person who doesn't, who's not a part of this community. But how do we bring those pieces together? And here is where the education has to get creative again. And, we look at the seeking out culturally competent professionals. Lucky touched on, I think Lucky and Jeffrey touched on, people not wanting to go see a therapist who doesn't look like them. And this was something that I had, I not that I was shocked, but I had, it took me some time to resonate with, because I kept thinking, why would people come talk to me about this? Why, what is it that I do? And it wasn't what I did. It was the way I looked. And it created, just the way you look, it creates a comfort level for someone to come and talk to you from that specific culture, because they feel safer, right? That platform has to be so safe and inviting every time. So we look at, these therapy groups, like do high schools have groups that will bring this community together? Like, can they go there and speak freely? Can a guidance counselor chair that group with a team leader? Can they, bring that in? Like bullying across the country has become a mandatory training for all schools, right? So now, so bringing in those pieces, like having those counselors help to create, we have different clubs in school. There should be an LGBT club in school. There should be a club that accepts people from this community. And also, seeking out, I do know that in New York, we have an LGBTQ center in the city, in Chelsea, and they have a lot of groups that they run. So I do know that they have a lot of groups, that I'm not sure, if they've actually resumed those groups. But we have different doctoral programs within New York State, and the postdoctoral programs will offer therapy sessions on a sliding scale. And that's, a resource that people can try to tap into to see if, I'm not sure if there's a waiting list, but that's something that's being done here to help people. And I know that Jeffrey is like jumping out of his chair. He's something.
Actually, Lucky wanted to chime in, and then we're going to let Jeffrey jump in.
So, Dr. K, I super appreciate all of those resources, but as a trans guy, that has been through all of the things that you have just described. Also, if it's literally so simple, right? Believe people when they show up and they tell you who they are. Just believe them. It's that simple, because down to the simplest of terms, all of us are going to move differently. All of us are going to transition differently, even from trans man to trans man, or non-binary to non-binary, or trans woman, so on and so forth. All of us are individuals, and all of us are going to move and navigate differently. If folks were just to take people one person at a time and understand that person is a person, and understand that mental health is not something that comes with being trans. So I want to be very clear. We don't suffer from mental health because we're trans. We suffer from mental health because of the way that we're treated because we're trans, right? We're okay being trans. Okay. For me, wearing a binder was one of the tightest pieces of clothing that I could ever put on, but it was the most liberating because I could walk out into the world and they could see me the way I saw me, right? So just understanding that we are all individuals, period, point blank, and that we are going to move differently from one to the next. And if people understood that and took the time to say, this is an individual, this is a person, and treated us all the same and provided resources for all people, right? And if we want to go deeper than that, trans folks are often asked to educate, okay? And I get it. But also we need to be compensated because we have to relive that trauma all over again.
Same thing with Black folks.
Exactly.
You know what? I'm so glad that you put it in that context because now I get it. Same way with everything we went through with George Floyd and how every Black person was suddenly a D&I expert. Even if you're a basketball coach, they wanted you to be a D&I expert.
Right.
I see you and I hear you and I thank you for that.
And we don't want to have to educate at all moments. But as trans people, when folks find out that we're trans, we are the new educator. Okay, so if you're gonna ask trans folks to educate you about their life and their traumas, pay them to do that. Make sure that they are compensated for the trauma that they have to go through to teach other folks.
Thank you, Lucky. Jeffrey, jump in.
Yeah, there's so much. I think going back to the school comment, having been a middle school and a high school teacher and was the only out teacher, everybody would look back at me like, oh my God, are you doing this? And I was like, you damn right I'm doing it because I see my students. There are 33 plus anti-trans bills being pushed across the state in the United States currently right now. Again, 33 out of our 50 plus states and territories. That's a big issue when we think about what's happening in the K-12 space and what money and resources and things get allocated there. Yeah, I was the one who was leading a lot of these charges at all of my schools. And I could have been fired for this with no recourse and it would have been legal. I'm very lucky that, I went to Wharton and Brown and more specifically was protected in those specific ways with the institutions that I was in, but the law still states, when I was at Brown doing my master's in urban education policy, I ended up doing a big research project on LGBT students within middle and high school spaces and what would happen on the impact if they actually got the resources. And it just was constantly proven again and again and again, is if you give the resources to the most marginalized folks at your school, which are queer and trans folks at the various margins that they come at, everyone is better off, even the straight people. So it's one of those things where we know what to do. And we know in a sense, how can I say this? Not that, us on this panel, we know what to do. And I think that if it requires this thing of moving from allyship to accomplice, because as you're seeing these big inequities, it requires really different solutions to happen. Like specifically here in Atlanta with Southern Fried Queer Pride, where we do these big festivals because Atlanta Pride is too white. And certain Pride festivals are not queer enough and they focus specifically on cis folk, or with the Trans Housing Coalition where there are all these Black trans women who are coming to Atlanta who are wanting resources. And we're trying to find ways of providing them because we know that there's so much religious, evangelical, colonialized way of going about things in the space that we had to raise $5 million to make our own things happen. So I get really passionate about this because, yes, allyship is important, but we need accomplices. We need people who are not only saying like, hey, that's really messed up, but hey, school districts and school board leaders, here's a comprehensive plan on how over the next 5 years, you too can cover transition surgery for your students using this specific dollar amount here, because we know that this works. But it definitely is going to require this accomplice thing. It's an active way of participating, because even as we mentioned all of these wonderful institutions, I can name my trans sibs who don't want to do any of these big institutions because they've seen what they've done to them, and will continue to piece together it through a mutual aid fashion, because they've been outcasted by their families, because they've been outcasted by the community. So yeah, those are the things that kind of just come up for me on just being vigilant about what you don't know and finding very, very quick ways to integrate it, because yeah, as you can see from across all of our pop political world, like there's just a lot of things happening, and you'll miss it, and we can miss people too, and that's just kind of my thoughts with what was coming up with what was said.
No, very well said, and thank you. And it really is about action. That's my biggest takeaway. It's one thing to be an ally, but it's another thing to take action, right? And to stand in solidarity and to make sure that we are on the same page and moving forward for what's going to be beneficial for the community in so many ways. So thank you for that, Jeffrey. I want to go back to you, Lucky. We talked a little bit earlier about, excuse me, when you are going through transition, how your family and friends really need to transition with you. And I just thought that was so powerful. We brought it up actually in the pre-call as well, as we were kind of talking about various subject matter. But can you share with us a little bit about that and how it really is important that it's a collective effort,
Right.
and that there is thoughtfulness and sincerity, and just the fact that it is something that if you truly do love your loved one, right, or want to support them, that you got to take the journey with them.
Right. And that actually works on both sides, because one thing that we talk to our younger, are those that are just newly transitioning, regardless of how old you are, is that we have time to figure out who we are in our heads, and we've gone through that process. I know for myself, I went through 10 years of trying to figure out who I was, but I had that 10 years to think about it, to figure it out, to put all the pieces together. And so when I came out and I said, I'm trans and this is who I am, this is what my name is, and these are my pronouns, I had that time and I had that chance to be able to process a lot of that. But I also had to give those around me that same time to process. But also, and I'm going to say that those folks that are in your space and say that they're going to support you and they're actively supporting you, need to actively support. So that means seeking out resources, that means seeking out information and not making that one individual your source of information, because they may not have all the answers, right? So it's a both and, because you want to make sure that those folks that are around you know what's going on with you and know that this is where you are in your life and this is where you are standing in your truth, right? But also those folks that are around you need to make sure that they're willing to take those steps and commit to going to find that information and actively supporting our folks.
Thank you, Lucky. And I cannot believe where the time went. Oh my gosh. And I'm usually a better keeper of time. It's 6:56, but we're going to try to roll through two more quick questions. And we also want to make sure that we leave resources. This is being recorded, so it will be repurposed on several of our platforms and pages. We're going to make sure that everyone has access to it. And again, it will live on through Facebook. But what a thoughtful and meaningful conversation. And again, we're just so grateful to our panelists tonight. Wanted to bring you in on that, Dr. K, to talk a little bit more just about multicultural challenges for the LGBTQ plus community and those in the trans community that may be transitioning, and just that family dynamic of that trauma that comes with that. Or that can come with that, rather.
That can, yeah, absolutely. It's Lucky just pointed out, when he came out to his mom, and getting that support. You were able to get some support. A lot of people don't get any support at all. But one of the factors that we look at here is the newness of it as well. And there's a lot of fear in families, like, what is this? What is this going to do to our integrity? Or what is this going to do to our status as a family, or who we are, and people are going to talk about us? And we come dependent. People who are born and raised and live, they embedded themselves into dependent culture. That is where it takes an entire village to raise a child. There's a shame factor and an embarrassment, like, oh, you've now violated or brought the family's name down because you've gone and done this. And it's almost like a punishment to the person who's actually experiencing this, which is a whole different level of trauma that we're looking at. So one of the pieces that I found is being tolerant, understanding what that really means for both parties. For the person who's going through a transition, or LGBTQ community in general, you're going through the process, being tolerant and not always being the educator. And I'm so glad that Jeffrey touched on this, because I'm like the token brown girl as well. And I'm like, I don't want that title. But it's, it's being tolerant and taking your power to name who you are and presenting it with that level of confidence. It's not what I want. This is what I need. I need you to hear me, listen to me, just to hear me. I don't want feedback, and please don't listen to me to ask me questions. Let me finish, because when you listen to hear, it's a whole different story. Because a lot of the times we assume that people are seeking advice, but the disclaimer should be, what am I listening for? What should I be listening for? Because a lot of times people already know what they have to do. And people from the trans community don't go through this process without knowing exactly what they want or what they need to do. They're already there. They just need that outlet to be heard as their authentic self. And one of the places, we talk about the support of friends and family. One of the most important places where family and friends are is the faith-based platforms, right? So changing the perception of those faith-based organizations. Who do you think is going to stand on that platform and pray as a Pentecostal or as a Hindu priest? Or, it's not going to be just a man. And I'm going to label this as a man, name it as a man, not label. I'm sorry, I take that back. Name it, because it's usually a man is a pundit, right? A man is a pastor. No, they're female pastors. They're female pundits now, right? There are lesbian pundits now. They're trans pundits now. So it's something that we have to look at. And we talked about this in the pre-session, when you look at Lord Shiva, Lord Shiva is ambiguous. He's not he, he's not she. Lord Shiva will embody anything that you want that body to be, right? If God lives within us and we're looking at this family and friends perspective, we need to recognize the importance of that platform to a person's well-being, how important it is for them. When we go to a church, we sit there and you want to be peaceful. It's that place that's supposed to present, or it's been presented in our culture and in our family. You go to church for peace of mind. You go to church to be blessed. So why is God not blessing me because I'm transgender? Why is God not blessing me because I like a woman? I'm a girl and I like a woman, or I'm a boy and I like a boy. I don't think God would be that judgmental. And to start that, to name that and start that dialogue from that platform that's supposedly safe, and not just naming it, call it out. You said I would be safe here. If I'm not safe here, exactly, where am I supposed to go? Tell me where I'm supposed to go, because you told me if I came and I did this, 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 and this, I would be safe and I would be accepted and I would be saved, right? For certain religions or certain faith-based platforms. So why can't I be saved? And why is this not my platform anymore? There are certain priests who refuses to do gay marriages, to conduct a ceremony. Who will say it out? It's like, and you're so comfortable to say that, and it's like, But do you know that your child is of the LGBTQ community? Where's your child? Because when you put somebody else's child, it's not somebody else's child, it's your child as well, because that's where we belong. We belong in the faith-based organizations, in those platforms. And that's one of the changes that we need to make sure that is made for the future.
And Dr. K, just to add on to what you were saying there as well, bringing this historical lens back to it, if you were to go to things pre-colonialism, a lot of our folks who were two-spirited, who had masculine and feminine representation, those were the people who were the higher ups in the spiritual community. So when you think about just the lies that colonialism can present to you, you really knowing history and really understanding that stuff is super important in decolonializing this brain, because I think we're all starting to get to this point that it's not true. And again, yeah.
And I got just one more thing to throw out there. If folks understood the perception, so if folks were just able to see it from our point of, as LGBTQ folks, right? Specifically trans folks, we don't transition from a place of bravery or courage, right? As folks see it, we transition from a place of survival. Like, I have to do this or I'm not going to live. Okay, this is coming from a place of self-preservation, not courage or bravery or strength. It's because we have to. And so if folks understood the other side of that, because from the outside looking in, folks tell me all the time, oh, you're so brave, oh, you're so courageous, so and you've got all this strength. No, it's a necessity for us. It's a I have to do this. So if folks were to be able to see both sides of that perception, then maybe they could see the humanity in us.
Thank you, Lucky. That is so powerful. Oh gosh, that's the purest lens, right? That you could see it through. And I hope there's some content to be made and more that we can do from that perspective. I think that is super important. It's 7:05 now, so I hope everyone is enjoying the conversation. I certainly am learning a lot and just so grateful for this conversation tonight that's being streamed on our Facebook platform as well as through Zoom. Again, this is being recorded. We will repurpose the content. We have one question that I want to get someone to take, if you can answer in about a minute or less, and then I want to make sure that we're leaving resources, particularly for family members. Our ED, Jewel Gooden, wanted to make sure that we can leave resources that family members can access as they are going through, quote unquote, the transition, with their loved one or their family member, or they're trying to go from being ally to accomplice, right? As Jeffrey was saying. So the question is, do you see more academic research in the academic world, like paper studies and research dedicated to trans youth nowadays? I don't know who would want to take that.
I can start with that. So there aren't that many studies that are being done. It's going to be done because this is very progressive. This community, I do believe in certain areas of, Shanti, you and I talked about this, especially mental health. And I go back to what Lucky said, we don't have mental health issues. Mental health didn't cause this to happen. We're just a human being. But when it comes, the oversatiation of letting people know this is what we need, we will oversatiate them until we can't talk anymore, until they're tired of hearing, and either they give in to us or they meet at the table for a discussion. The same thing with research. It's, with everything that's happening now, I do believe there are many people who are conducting research, and it's going to be more progressive. It's going to be wider. Different universities will have different people who will run studies. I do know that there are many different organizations who are collecting data, especially on trans athletes, because the Tribeca Film Festival presented about 2 or 3 years ago a documentary on trans athletes and the challenges that they experience. And I know that there's a study coming out from that. And I do believe that it's going to get more progressive as we move forward.
Thank you, Dr. K. Did you want to add anything to that quickly, Lucky?
Yeah, so around transmasculine folks, TM Health Study LA was a CBO community health study that we did around transmasculine folks in particular. So I have the link to that. So there are some studies that are coming about, but again, for the transmasculine folks, we get overlooked quite often. So we've started to do our own research, and figure out what's going on with our folks, and figure out how we can get some resources around all of the things, because we're an afterthought for a lot of folks. So I think research is coming up, but it's starting to happen from the communities that are not being researched.
Absolutely. Taking it into your own hands to make sure, like you said, that you can get those much needed resources. If you have that link, Lucky, if you want to put it in the chat section, that would be great. So we just want to close with some family resources that might be available, and we'll go around and let everyone know how they can stay connected to you and your organizations and what you're doing. And just thank you again so much for this conversation, again, with Silence to Shame and the Los Angeles LGBT Center as we close out Pride Month. But as we said in our pre-session as well, I'm telling you, y'all should have been in the pre-session. We were just having a good old spirited conversation, and we made the commitment at Silence to Shame that we're going to make sure that this conversation goes past June, right? Just like Black History Month is every month, right? So we're going to make sure that we have these conversations every month, whether it's socially, collectively, as a community via these, Zoom panels and Facebook live talks and so forth, but we're going to keep it going, right? And really continue to be really thoughtful and intentional about the work that we do and the conversations that we have. So let's start with, again, Jeffrey Martin. Do you have any resources, or let us know how we can stay in touch with you and the work you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. Folks can follow me. I'm very much an Instagram person. So that's Jeffrey D. Martin. So JFFREY D. Martin. My name is right here. And I'm there, but I guess some of the resources, I tend to pull things from media and archival works. So Netflix has a really interesting documentary called Disclosure that is worth a gander if you have a moment. I know folks probably know of Legendary and or Pose, but outside of just competitive shows and a somewhat nonfiction, somewhat fictional, somewhat representation of some things that are there. I'm sure if you literally just type in Disclosure on Netflix and you see all of the films that come up from there, it'll point you into some really great resources, because every documentary isn't treated the same, but that would be my one.
Thank you. And thank you again for sharing today. We really appreciate you. Dr. K.
Sure. I put in my Gmail address, and if anyone knows Shanti knows where to find me. So feel free, reach out. And if I can help in any way, shape, or form, I will do my best.
Any resources that you have on your end, or any therapy sites that you want to recommend?
So the one site that I would recommend is the LGBTQ Center, which is in Chelsea, Manhattan, because I'm in New York. Mm-hmm. So that would be one of the centers that I would definitely recommend for resources.
Okay, great.
I'll put it in the chat as well.
Perfect. And last but not least, Lucky.
Okay, so you can find me on Instagram, Facebook, all the things at Lucky Alexander, or Invisible Men, and we're on Instagram, we're on Facebook, and then you can find us at Invisible T with the letter T men.org or .com. Either one, it'll go to the same website.
Amazing. And you can follow us at Silence to Shame on Instagram, on Facebook and Twitter. It's at Silence TH Shame. We also have a podcast that is available with over 47 episodes on Spotify, SoundCloud, Google Play, iTunes, and what else? You can follow me at Shanti Das 404. Again, I want to thank Melantha Hodge, who connected me to Lucky, and I want to thank the Los Angeles LGBT Center. Thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you, Cameron. Thank you, Dr. K. I can't wait to see you in person and us to be able to have these conversations in person again as we slowly transition out of the pandemic. But I think it's just so much more work to be done. And so on behalf of Silence to Shame, myself, our executive director, Jewel Gooding, thank you everyone who tuned in tonight. Again, this session will live on Facebook. as well as on our Silence or Shame YouTube page. And we're going to make sure we get it to our supporting partners so that they could hopefully disseminate it to their audiences. So I just want to make sure everyone has a wonderful night and just leave you with just the understanding of people wanting to be seen. I see you, Lucky. I see you, Jeffrey. I see you, Dr. K. Thank you and good night.
Thank you, Shanti, and thank you for introducing me to my 2 new siblings.
Yes,
It's such an
likewise.
honor. And thank you for hearing us as well. And we will continue to speak and oversatiate any community.
Yes, likewise.
Namaste.
Thank you.
Thank you.